I had been driving for hours along a stretch of highway that cut through nothing but farmland and forest. The sun had set long ago, leaving the sky a deep, featureless black, dotted with stars that barely mattered against the weight of the night. My headlights illuminated only a few feet ahead, and the long, empty road seemed to stretch forever. I had left the city behind around 9, intending to make it to my friend's place 3 hours away. But somewhere past the last small town, everything changed. The first thing I noticed was how silent it was. The hum of my tires against the asphalt and the occasional whisper of the wind were the only sounds, but even that felt hollow. The radio, which I had turned on for company, played songs I didn't remember selecting. Static hissed between them, but it felt almost comforting compared to the outside. I watched the trees pass by on either side, dark masses, and for a moment I imagined they were moving faster than the car. My pulse quickened, and I tightened my grip on the wheel, telling myself I was being paranoid. About an hour in, the road narrowed. It had been 2 lanes, now a single stretch of asphalt with faded lines that disappeared in the darkness. There were no streetlights, no signs of life, only the occasional reflector that glinted in my headlights like tiny, startled eyes. I slowed, careful, because the road had dips and curves that surprised me. Something about the isolation made every sound sharper. A branch scraping the roof sounded like it had just fallen in front of me. My headlights caught movement out of the corner of my eye. A deer? A stray dog? My heart jumped, but when I looked directly, there was nothing. I passed an old gas station on my left, shuttered and dark. I remembered seeing it in daylight years ago, and now it looked like it had been abandoned decades. The windows were dusty, cracked, and the pump handles hung crookedly. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and pressed the accelerator again. The air felt heavier, colder, and I noticed the fog settling over the road. Not thick fog, just a thin veil that made everything blur at the edges. I kept my headlights low, but the mist clung to the glass, and the lines on the road faded in and out like ripples in water. I started noticing the way the trees leaned toward the road. Maybe it was the fog, maybe it was exhaustion, but they felt closer, pressing down. Shadows shifted among the trunks, darker than the night around them. I tried to focus on the road, on the painted lines that still appeared here and there, but my mind kept wandering. The thought of being alone out here with no one around made me tense. Every sound, wind through branches, a distant rustle, my own tires, seemed amplified, like the night was listening to me drive. Then I saw it. A car parked on the side of the road, facing the opposite direction. Its brake lights were off. I didn't recognize the make, the model, just a dark silhouette. At first, I thought someone had pulled over to sleep or fix a flat, but as I passed, I realized it wasn't empty. A figure was slumped in the driver's seat. My stomach turned. It was hard to make out in the shadows, but it looked human. I slowed, feeling my hands tighten on the wheel. I didn't want to stop, didn't want to look too closely, but I couldn't look away. Then, just as suddenly, the figure moved. Not wildly, not threateningly, but it shifted as if it were waking. I accelerated, heart hammering. My eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. Nothing followed, just darkness. I told myself it was nothing. Someone asleep, a trick of the light. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I had passed something that wasn't supposed to be there. The fog thickened. My headlights barely reached more than 10 feet ahead. Every bump in the road sent a jolt through the car. Every shadow felt alive. I tried to focus on the curves, the reflectors, anything that felt familiar. Then the radio went dead. The static that had felt like company was gone. Complete silence filled the cabin. I realized I hadn't passed another car for miles, hadn't seen any sign of life. My pulse was loud in my ears. I noticed the smell first. It was faint at first, metallic like iron and wet dirt. Then it got stronger. My stomach sank. I saw the cause, a patch of dark, slick streaking across the road. Wet, uneven, it glistened in the headlights. I braked hard, the tires squealing against the asphalt. My car slowed just past the streak. I stared. It looked like blood, fresh. I didn't know what it was, didn't want to think about it, but the way it was smeared across the lane told me it had come from something alive. I pressed on slowly. Every turn was a calculation. Every shadow, a warning. The fog pressed against my windows, the smell hung in the air, and I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I kept glancing at the side of the road, at every tree, at every curve, expecting to see something emerge. The hours crawled. Finally, a faint glow appeared ahead. Headlights? A building? I wasn't sure, but I drove toward it with everything in me. As I approached, I realized it was a small convenience store, still open, neon sign buzzing. Relief hit me like a wave. I parked and sat there for a moment, letting my hands unclench from the wheel. The air inside smelled of coffee and bleach, normal and safe. I bought water and a soda, hands shaking, trying to calm my racing heart. Outside, the road was just as dark, just as empty, but I had a point of reference, a place to stop if I needed. I filled the car with gas, checked the tires, and mapped out the rest of the drive. I decided to wait for a bit until my eyes cleared. Nothing followed me into the light. Nothing moved in the darkness beyond the road. The stretch that had terrified me felt distant now, like a bad dream I had survived. I got back in the car an hour later, refreshed and cautious. The rest of the drive was quiet but uneventful. The fog thinned, the road widened again, and the city lights appeared on the horizon. I didn't look for anything unusual after that. The patch of dark on the road, the figure in the abandoned car, whatever they had been, they were left behind. I kept my eyes forward, my hand steady, my foot on the pedal, and finally reached my destination safely. When I parked at my friend's place, I sat for a moment, taking in the light, the familiar sounds of cars and distant voices, the safety of walls and other people. The road behind me was just a memory now, a stretch of darkness, fog, and strange, inexplicable things. I didn't know what I had passed, and I didn't want to know. I only knew I had driven through it, alone, and come out on the other side. That was enough. I was driving alone after a late shift, the kind that drains you without doing anything dramatic. It was close to 1 a.m. I had taken an extra route to avoid traffic and tolls, a two-lane road that cut through farmland and low wooded areas. I had driven it before, enough to trust it, but not enough to know it by heart. The night was clear and cold, the road dry, the sky black and empty. I kept the radio off. After a full day of noise, silence felt easier to manage. The only sound were the tires and the faint rattle of something loose in the trunk. The dashboard clock glowed dim red. Every few miles, a reflector would flash and disappear. No houses, no streetlights, just long stretches of darkness broken by fields and tree lines. About 20 minutes in, I noticed a car behind me. At first it was just headlights far back, steady and centered. Nothing unusual. I kept my speed. The road stayed straight for a while, then curved gently left. The headlights followed. When I checked again a few minutes later, they were closer. I told myself it was normal. Late-night drivers tend to bunch up on empty roads. I eased a little to the right to give room in case they wanted to pass. They didn't. They stayed right where they were, close enough now that the glare filled my rearview mirror. I sped up slightly. The headlights matched it. I slowed back down. Same thing. They never drifted, never wobbled, never changed distance in a way that felt natural. They just held steady like they were locked to me. The road narrowed as it entered a wooded stretch. Trees leaned in, branches dark against the sky. The air felt colder there, heavier. My shoulders tightened without me noticing. I checked my mirrors more often. The headlights stayed fixed, white and sharp. I tried to identify the car by its lights. They were standard, nothing custom. No fog lights, no high beams, just plain headlights, slightly uneven, one angled a bit higher than the other. That detail stuck with me because it never changed. A mile later, I saw something else that made my stomach drop. Another set of headlights appeared far ahead, coming toward me in the opposite lane. As the oncoming car passed, its headlights briefly lit the road behind me. For a split second, I saw the car following me clearly in the reflection off the trees and signs. It was much closer than I thought, close enough that I should have seen the shape of it before. But even in that flash of light, something was off. The car was old, boxy, paint dull, and uneven. The windshield looked clouded. The driver's side mirror was missing, and the front bumper was bent inward, like it had hit something hard and never been fixed. As soon as the oncoming car passed, the view snapped back to darkness, and all I had again were the headlights in my mirror. My hands tightened on the wheel. I felt alert in a way that cut through the fatigue. My heart rate picked up. I told myself not to panic. There was still nothing clearly wrong. No aggressive moves. No swerving. Just following. The road dipped and rose through the trees. Cell service dropped. My phone screen showed no bars. I didn't like that, but I wasn't surprised. This area was known for it. I decided to pull off at the next safe spot and let the car pass. There was a small gravel turnout ahead, used by farmers and utility crews. I slowed and signaled early. The headlights behind me slowed too. I turned into the turnout and stopped. The car behind me did not pass. It pulled in behind me and stopped as well, headlights still on, engine running. The distance between us was too close for comfort. I sat there, frozen, staring at the steering wheel. My breathing felt loud in my ears. Seconds passed, then more. I considered driving off, but the narrow turnout meant I would have to pull back onto the road in front of them. The idea made my skin crawl. I considered backing up, but the gravel dropped off behind me into a shallow ditch. I waited for something to happen. Nothing did. The headlights stayed on. The engine idled. No doors opened. No movement that I could see. The light spilled around my car, washing the sides and mirrors in white. After what felt like a long time, but was probably less than a minute, the headlights shut off. Not dimmed. Shut off completely. The darkness behind me felt heavier than before. I checked my mirrors. I could still make out the shape of the car, a darker mass against the darker trees, but barely. I didn't wait anymore. I pulled back onto the road and accelerated hard. Gravel sprayed. The engine whined. I didn't look back right away. I focused on the road ahead, keeping the car straight as the trees thinned and the fields opened up again. When I finally checked the mirror, the headlights were back. They were farther now, but gaining. The uneven angle was still there. The distance closed at a steady rate. My pulse thudded in my neck. I pushed the speed higher than I should have on that road. The car followed without hesitation. A few miles later, I saw the glow of a small town ahead. Not much, just a cluster of streetlights and a gas station sign. Relief hit me hard enough to make my eyes sting. As I got closer, the road widened slightly. A turn lane appeared. I slowed, signaled, and turned toward the gas station, my heart pounding. The headlights behind me did not turn. They stayed on a main road, continuing straight, never slowing, never speeding up. They passed the intersection and disappeared into the dark beyond the town. I pulled into the gas station lot and parked under the lights. My hands were shaking now that the tension had somewhere to go. I shut the engine off and sat there, staring through the windshield, forcing myself to breathe evenly. After a few minutes, I went inside, bought a drink I didn't really want, and stood under the bright lights until my heart rate settled. When I left the station and got back in my car, I noticed something I hadn't before. Along the rear bumper, there was a smear of dried mud, fresh enough to still be damp underneath. My car had been cleaned earlier that evening. The smear matched the height of another bumper. Later, at home, I checked the local news and police logs out of habit more than fear. I found a short report buried in a weekly update. An older sedan, matching the shape I had seen, had been involved in a hit-and-run weeks earlier on a rural road nearby. The driver had fled. The car was still unaccounted for. I don't know if it was the same vehicle. I can't prove anything about that night beyond what I felt and what I saw. What I do know is that nothing technically threatening ever happened. No one chased me off the road. No one tried to stop me. No laws of reality broke. But the way that car followed me, matched every change, pulled in behind me without reason, and sat there in silence before turning its lights off, stays with me. I don't take that road anymore. Not because I think something is waiting there, but because I learned how little it takes for a normal night drive to turn into something that leaves a mark, even when everything that happened has a reasonable explanation. I was driving overnight because I was broke and late on rent. I had taken a delivery job moving car parts from Phoenix to a small repair shop up north. The pay was higher if I delivered before morning, and the money difference mattered more than sleep. I loaded the trunk with boxed alternators and brake assemblies, checked the straps once, and left after sunset to miss traffic and save fuel. I avoided the main highway because my car drank gas at high speed. I took a service road I found on an old GPS map that ran parallel to the interstate. It dipped in a desert scrub and stayed dark for long stretches. The road surface was cracked and uneven, patched in places with black strips that shined under headlights. My tires hummed and thumped in a steady pattern that kept me alert at first, then wore on me as the hours stacked up. The desert at night felt close and empty at the same time. The headlights carved a tunnel through creosote and low brush. Every few miles there were gaps where the ground dropped away into dry washes. Wind pushed sand across the pavement in thin lines that looked like hair. I kept the windows up because the air smelled sharp and dusty, and because it was colder than I expected. Animal eyes flashed far off the shoulder. Pairs of yellow or green dots appeared and vanished as soon as I slowed. When I sped up, they stayed in place, floating in the dark. I told myself they were rabbits or coyotes. The map showed no towns, just a thin gray line and a few faded icons that meant nothing to me. I watched the dashboard clock more than the road. Every minute felt counted. The engine ran steady, but the smell changed. At first it was just warm air, then something sharper crept in, like heated rubber or old oil. I turned down the radio to listen for knocks or rattles. There were none. The road straightened and the desert opened into a wide flat with nothing taller than my hood. That was when I saw something tall off the shoulder. It stood near a shallow ditch, pale against the dark. I thought it was a signpost at first, one of those thin metal markers with reflectors. Then it moved sideways. It did not step forward or back. It slid a short distance, slow and smooth, like it was being pulled. I did not see it cross the road. I glanced down at the clock, then back up. It was closer. I told myself my eyes were tired. I fixed my gaze on the center line and kept driving. The smell grew stronger. The temperature gauge edged up. I eased off the gas. When I looked again, the tall shape was near the shoulder, still not in the lane, still pale. It did not sway or shrink as I passed. It did not react to the car at all. The service road bent slightly and dipped. The headlights bounced. When it leveled out, the shape was gone. My pulse slowed. I checked the mirrors and saw nothing but dust. I laughed once, short and dry, and then the smell hit hard. It burned my nose. The gauge climbed fast. I pulled over on a packed dirt, shut the engine off, and popped the hood. Heat rolled out. The radiator fan clicked and whined as it slowed. I stood there with the desert pressing in, my breath loud in my ears. The stars were sharp. The interstate was a faint line of moving lights far to the east. I knelt and looked under the car. No puddles, no steam. I straightened and saw the footprints. They were in the dust around the tires. Bare prints, long and narrow, with toes stretched out like they had been pressed hard into the ground. They circled the car in a loose ring. They were not animal. There were no claws. The heel marks were flat and wide. The stride made no sense, uneven and tight, like someone had walked around without caring where they placed their feet. My mouth went dry. I checked the hood latch and the doors. Everything was closed. I shined my phone light into the scrub. Nothing moved. The print stopped at the edge of the hard dirt and did not lead anywhere. The smell still hung in the air, heavy and sweet. I closed the hood and got back in. I did not stop again. I drove with the windows cracked despite the smell, watching the gauge and the mirrors. The road stayed dark. The animal eyes did not come back. The service road climbed and fell, and the engine whined under the load. When the gauge touched red, I turned the heater on full to pull heat from the engine. Hot air poured into the cabin. Sweat ran down my back. Near dawn, the desert thinned. The service road met a paved spur that led to the repair shop. I rolled in with the engine rattling and the smell still there. I shut it off and sat until the ticking stopped. In the light, the dust on the car showed smears where something had leaned or brushed past. The footprints were still there, clear and wrong. The shop yard was empty. I unloaded the boxes and stacked them by the door like the instructions said. As the sky brightened, I walked the edge of the lot. Beyond the fence, the service road ran straight. Along the ditch were thin metal stakes with faded reflectors, spaced unevenly. One was bent low, its reflector cracked, and smeared with pale paint. Nearby, the ground showed marks where someone had dragged a tall sign frame sideways to reset it. The dust held the same long prints, stretched by old rubber soles worn smooth, the tread gone so they looked bare. A work notice was taped to the fence, curled and sun-bleached. It showed a diagram of the service road and warned of overnight maintenance, sign relocation, and temporary markers set by hand to guide drivers away from a washed-out culvert. The date matched the night I drove. The pale shape made sense then. The sideways movement made sense. The closeness was my speed, and my focus playing tricks on me. I checked my car again in the daylight. A hose clamp had loosened and sprayed coolant onto the exhaust, burning and stinking without leaking much. The heat had built slowly, enough to scare me without killing the engine. The footprint circled the car because someone had stopped to check the heat and the noise, then moved on when I shut it down and the fan slowed. I cleaned the dust from the doors with my sleeve and drove to a gas station down the road. I tightened the clamp with a borrowed wrench, topped off the coolant, and washed my hands. The desert looked small in the sun. The service road was just a thin scar beside the highway. I drove home on the main lanes with the windows down, the smell gone, the clock ticking toward rent. I was driving back alone after dropping off equipment for work, later than planned, later than I liked. It was well past midnight, the hour where roads stop feeling public and start feeling owned by whoever is still awake. I chose a state route I normally avoided because it shaved 20 minutes off the drive. I had driven it a few times in daylight, enough to know it was narrow and poorly marked, but nothing about it had ever scared me before. The night was clear but moonless. My headlights felt thin against the dark, like they were barely pushing it back. The road cut through low hills and stretches of pine forest. There were long gaps between reflectors, and some of them were missing altogether. My speed stayed steady, cautious but not slow. I wanted to get home. About 10 minutes in, I noticed the temperature gauge flicker. Just a small twitch, then back to normal. I watched it longer than I needed to. The car was old but reliable. I had kept up with maintenance. I told myself it was nothing. The road dipped into a shallow valley, then climbed again. The forest thickened. The air felt cooler, even with the windows up. My phone lost signal. The screen showed the map frozen in place. I didn't need it anymore. There were no turns for miles. That was when I saw the cones. They appeared suddenly in my headlights, bright orange against the dark pavement. Not a full closure, just a loose taper narrowing the lane. There was no warning sign before them, no flashing lights, no arrow board. Just cones placed too close together, some leaning, some scuffed like they had been moved more than once. I slowed and eased through, keeping my tires centered. The cones ended as abruptly as they began. The road opened back up, unchanged. No equipment, no crew truck, no work lights humming in the distance. I checked my mirrors. Nothing behind me. A few minutes later, there were cones again. This time they were placed differently, wider apart, stretching farther down the road. One lay on its side, rolling slightly in the wake of my car. The pattern didn't match standard setup. Anyone trained would know better. I slowed more, scanning the shoulder for a parked vehicle or reflective vest. There was nothing. I passed through and kept driving. My shoulders felt tight now. I told myself it was probably a county crew staging early, or cones knocked loose and dragged by traffic. Still, the lack of signage bothered me. The temperature gauge twitched again. This time it stayed high for a second longer before settling. I turned off the heater and cracked the window. Cold air rushed in, sharp and clean. The third set of cones showed up less than a mile later. These were clustered around a dark shape in the road. As I approached, my headlights revealed a section of torn asphalt, jagged and uneven, like a fresh pothole that had blown out. Chunks of pavement were scattered across the lane. I swerved carefully around it, heart pounding harder now. That kind of damage didn't happen quietly. It came from heavy impact or sudden collapse. There should have been signs miles back. I drove on, more alert than tired now. The forest thinned briefly, opening into a stretch of low brush and rock. The road curved left. At the far edge of my headlights, I saw something reflective flash and vanish. I slowed, scanning the shoulder. There was a man standing near the tree line. He wore a reflective vest, but it was dull and dirty, the strips cracked and peeling. He wasn't flagging traffic. His arms hung at his sides. His posture looked wrong, slouched forward slightly, like he was bracing against pain or exhaustion. He faced the road, but didn't step closer as I passed. I didn't stop. I checked the mirror as soon as I was past him. He stayed where he was, shrinking into the dark. No movement, no reaction. My breathing felt shallow. My grip on the wheel was tight enough to ache. I kept going, counting seconds, counting reflectors. Another half-mile down the road, my headlights caught something else. A pickup truck sat angled off the shoulder, nose buried into a shallow ditch. Its hazard lights were off. The cab was dark. The driver's door hung open. The truck's front end was crushed in, metal folded back around the wheel well. Snow from an earlier plow line was churned and dirty around it. I slowed, almost to a stop. There were no skid marks leading up to it, just a sudden break where the shoulder dropped away. The damage looked recent, fresh. The metal still shone where paint had peeled back. I scanned the area. No movement, no footprints I could see from the road, no other vehicles. I drove past, heart racing now, thoughts stacking faster than I could sort them. The cones, the pothole, the man, the truck. None of it felt staged, but none of it felt handled either. It looked like a scene interrupted, frozen mid-response. A mile later, my dashboard lights flickered hard and went dark. The engine stayed on, but the gauges vanished. The headlights dimmed, then cut out completely. I lifted my foot and held the wheel straight, coasting blind for a few seconds that felt much longer. The edge of the road was just visible as a pale line against the trees. I guided the car onto the shoulder by feel and let it roll to a stop. The silence after was complete. No engine noise, no wind, just my breathing and the faint ticking of cooling metal. I sat there for a moment, hands shaking, then turned the key again. The dashboard lit up. The headlights came back. The engine started clean, like nothing had happened. I got out of the car. The cold hit hard. My breath fogged the air. I walked a few steps ahead, scanning the road. The surface near where I stopped was scuffed, marked by fresh tire tracks that didn't belong to me. They veered suddenly toward the shoulder, then stopped. I followed them with my eyes. They lined up with the damaged section I had passed earlier, and beyond that, with the ditch where the truck sat. The pattern clicked together in my head. The cones weren't a work crew. They were placed by someone trying to warn traffic after a crash. The pothole wasn't a pothole. It was damage from the truck losing control and tearing up the road surface. The man in the vest wasn't working. He was injured, disoriented, trying to slow cars without understanding how to do it safely. The open truck door made sense now. The missing hazard lights, the lack of official response. The man had likely walked the road, placing cones until exhaustion or pain forced him to stop. The vest was old because it was probably kept behind the seat, not meant for real traffic control. My electrical issue had its own cause. Later inspection showed a loose ground strap that failed briefly under vibration and cold. It explained the flicker, the shutdown, the restart. I got back in the car and drove the rest of the way home without stopping again. At first light, I called the non-emergency line and reported the crash location. By the time crews arrived, the scene made sense to them too. I drove that road again weeks later. The cones were gone. The pavement was patched. The ditch showed signs of cleanup. Nothing looked out of place. What stayed with me was how close I had come to driving through a situation that hadn't finished unfolding yet, and how easily confusion and exhaustion can turn a normal road into something dangerous without anything supernatural involved. I don't take shortcuts at night anymore. Not because I'm afraid of the dark, but because I know how fragile order can be when one small event breaks it, and how quiet the aftermath can look if you arrive at the wrong time. It was February of 2014, just after midnight, outside Duluth, Minnesota. The kind of night where cold feels thick and the sky presses down low, trapping sound. Snow lined the shoulders in hard gray banks, cut by plow blades days earlier. The road itself was dry in places and glazed in others, polished by traffic and refreeze. I was driving. My buddy sat in the passenger seat, hood up, half asleep, hands tucked under his thighs to keep warm. We were heading overnight to catch an early shift. Neither of us wanted to be awake. Coffee did nothing. The cab smelled like stale heat and wet boots. The radio signal was weak out there, fading in and out as the road dipped through shallow valleys and climbed again. Music would stretch thin, warp, then disappear into static before snapping back without warning. I kept the volume low. Loud noise made the fatigue worse. The headlights carved two pale lanes through the dark. The trees along that stretch stood close and straight, trunks black against snow, branches bare and stiff. Every mile marker slid past with a soft flash of reflection. I counted them without meaning to, just to stay alert. Somewhere past the last decent station, the radio settled on a call-in show. I didn't change it because changing things felt like effort. The host's voice was calm but distant, like it was coming through a wall. The signal dipped, then steadied. The topic wasn't clear at first. I caught pieces of a man speaking, slow, and even describing something that had already happened. He talked about a crash on a snowy road. He named mile markers. He mentioned the grade of a shoulder, the way the snow piled near the ditch, the sound of tires losing grip. He spoke like he was remembering it, not like he was upset or asking for help. The host stopped responding at some point. The man kept going anyway, filling the space. My buddy lifted his head a little. I felt my focus sharpen in a way that didn't feel good. The road ahead looked exactly like what was being described. Long straight stretch, trees tight to the edge, snowbanks uneven where plows had backed off. I told myself it was common terrain for that area. There was nothing special about it. Then we passed the mile marker the caller mentioned. I noticed it because I had been counting. The number matched. A few minutes later, another marker slid by. Same number the man on the radio had just described. The details lined up too closely to ignore. He mentioned a shallow curve coming up, the kind that didn't look dangerous until you were already on it. The road bent ahead of us in that same lazy way. The radio crackled. The man kept talking. His tone never changed. He described the headlights dimming, then failing. He mentioned the engine still running for a moment after, the way the world narrowed when the lights went out. At that exact moment, our dashboard went dark. The gauges vanished. The radio cut to silence. The headlights dropped out so fast it felt like the night slammed shut. There was no gradual fade. 1 second the road was there, the next it was gone. My hands tightened on the wheel by instinct. I didn't brake hard. I let off the gas and held the car straight, guided by memory and the faint glow of snow at the edges. The engine kept turning for a few seconds, then sputtered. The sound of tires on pavement grew louder in the absence of everything else. We coasted. The car rolled through darkness thick enough to feel solid. I could hear my own breathing and nothing more. We slowed to a stop without hitting anything. The silence stretched. I stayed still, afraid to move the wheel, afraid to reach for anything. My buddy didn't speak. He didn't need to. The moment had weight on it, like pressing a hand flat on the chest. Then the lights came back. The dashboard flickered on, gauges jumping, radio humming to life. The headlights spilled across the road and into the trees. Music played, clean and steady, like it had been there all along. No call-in show, no voices, just a song I recognized but couldn't name in that moment. I pulled over onto the shoulder and shut the engine off. My hands shook when I took them off the wheel. The cold rushed back in as the heater died. Snow crunched under my boots when I stepped out. The air smelled sharp and clean, the way it only does deep into winter. That's when I saw the skid marks. They cut across the lane we had just been in, dark lines gouged into the thin snow layer, starting near the curve and ending in the trees. The marks were fresh, edges still sharp, snow dusted outward where tires had bitten hard. Branches nearby were snapped low. The ground beyond the bank was churned and raw. We stood there and looked at them for a long time. No wrecked car, no flashing lights, no sound of engines, just the marks in the trees and the quiet road. We got back in and drove the rest of the way without turning the radio off again. Neither of us said anything. There was nothing useful to say. Later, after daylight, I made sense of it piece by piece. The stretch of road we were on had a history. Accidents happened there in winter, often at night, often at that curve. Local stations sometimes replayed old segments during low staffing hours. The call-in show had likely been a recorded episode pulled from the archive, broadcast during a dead zone with no host monitoring live input. The man describing the crash had done so years earlier, his details still accurate because the road hadn't changed. The electrical failure had an explanation too. The cold had worked a loose ground behind the dashboard. When the car hit a subtle bump near that curve, the connection failed just long enough to kill the lights and radio before snapping back. The engine stalled because modern cars don't like sudden voltage drops at idle. I had the part replaced a week later. The mechanic showed me the corrosion. The timing was what made it stick. The alignment of details. The way exhaustion sharpened coincidence into something that felt personal and directed. The skid marks were from a crash earlier that night. One that didn't make the news because no one was hurt badly enough to warrant it. A car had slid off, been pulled out, and left behind the only evidence we saw. All of it had reasons. None of it broke the rules of the world. I still think about that drive when I pass mile markers at night. I still remember the way the dark closed in and how quiet everything became when the lights went out. Knowing why it happened doesn't change how real it felt in the moment or how close we were to adding our own marks to that snow. I was returning a friend's car after house sitting for a week. The place was finished, the keys were in my pocket, and I wanted to be done with it. I didn't know the area well and didn't want to guess my way through unfamiliar streets, so I trusted the navigation without thinking twice. I set the phone in the holder, plugged it in, and pulled away as the sky faded from dark blue into full night. The car smelled wrong from the moment I got in. It wasn't dirty in a normal way. It smelled like old water that never dried, mixed with metal and something stale. I cracked the window, but it didn't help much. The smell clung to the upholstery and seemed to come from the vents too. When I turned the wheel, the dashboard lights flickered, just a quick dip and return like the car blinked. I told myself it was just an old vehicle with quirks. My friend had mentioned electrical issues before. I focused on the road and followed the instructions as they came. The streets thinned out fast. Houses spaced farther apart, then stopped altogether. Trees replaced buildings. The road narrowed and the paint lines faded. The headlights showed damp pavement that reflected back too much light, making the edges hard to judge. The car felt heavier than it should, like it was carrying extra weight I couldn't see. Every turn made the lights flicker again. The radio screen dimmed once, then came back. I turned it off. The silence made the smell more noticeable. I breathed through my mouth and kept going. After a while, I realized the GPS wasn't updating right. The map was moving, the arrow sliding forward, but the road ahead didn't match what I saw on the screen. Curves came where the map showed straight stretches. Intersections appeared without warning. The voice prompts lagged behind my position. I slowed down, watching for street signs, but there weren't many. I told myself the signal was weak. That happens in wooded areas. I stayed on the road it told me to take, because turning off felt worse than staying put. That's when I saw the woman. She was walking along the shoulder on the right side, close enough that my headlights caught her clearly. She was barefoot. Her feet were dark with dirt, Saul's pale where the light hit them. She wore a long coat, thick and heavy, the kind meant for cold rain, not a summer night. It hung straight on her frame, soaked through at the hem. She didn't look at the car as I passed. Her head stayed forward. Her arms hung stiff at her sides. Her hair was dark and clung to her neck. She walked steady, not fast, not slow, like she had been doing it for a long time and would keep doing it no matter what passed her by. I eased off the gas without meaning to. My chest felt tight. There was nothing impossible about her being there, but everything about it felt wrong. No nearby houses. No sidewalk. No shoes. No reaction to a car slowing beside her. As soon as she slipped out of the headlights, I felt watched. Not in a sharp way. Not like someone staring straight at me. It was more like pressure, like something heavy settling in the car. I glanced at the side mirror, then the rear view. The road behind me was empty. Trees closed in on both sides. The feeling stayed. The windshield began to fog along the bottom edge. Thin at first, then thicker, creeping upward. I reached to adjust the air, turning on the defroster. The vents blew damp air that smelled worse than before. The fog spread instead of clearing. Then I saw the marks. Wet footprints were forming on the inside of the windshield, low and close together, appearing one after another. They weren't sharp prints. They were smears shaped like feet, as if something was pressed and dragged slightly. They started near the passenger side and moved toward the center, slowly sliding downward as gravity pulled the moisture. My hands clenched on the wheel so hard my fingers hurt. I didn't scream. I didn't brake. I stared at the road ahead and forced myself to keep breathing. I knew what I was seeing, even if my body refused to accept it. Condensation, water, something dripping or leaking and running along the glass in a way my brain didn't want to label yet. The pattern looked like footprints because my mind was already looking for a reason to panic. The car shuddered as I hit a rough patch of road. More moisture spread across the windshield. The defroster did nothing. The flickering lights dimmed again, longer this time, then returned. I wiped at the glass with my sleeve without taking my eyes off the road. The water smeared, leaving streaks that caught the headlights and made everything blur. I wiped again, harder. The marks thinned but didn't vanish. The feeling of being watched eased as the road straightened. I passed the spot where the woman should have been visible behind me. She was gone. No shape on the shoulder. No movement between the trees. I drove faster. The navigation recalculated and sent me down a longer route, looping back toward familiar roads. I didn't question it. I followed every instruction and didn't slow down until I reached streetlights again. By the time I pulled into my friend's driveway, my shoulders ached from tension. I shut the car off and sat there for a moment, listening to the ticking engine and the soft drip of water somewhere inside the cabin. I noticed the passenger seat then. The fabric was darkened, soaked through. Water had pooled in the seat crease and spilled onto the floor mat. When I pressed my fingers into it, cold water welled up. The source became obvious once I looked closer. The windshield seal along the top edge was cracked and pulling away from the frame. Rainwater had been seeping in the whole drive, running down the inside of the glass. When the air cooled and the humidity rose, it condensed and traced paths downward, following gravity and vibration. The patterns lined up just enough to look like something else. The smell made sense too. Old leaks, trapped moisture, metal beneath damp fabric. The woman on the road fit into it as well. There's a creek not far from that stretch, swollen from recent storms. Someone walking home soaked, coat heavy with water, shoes lost or carried. She hadn't looked at the car because she was tired, focused somewhere else entirely. When I handed the keys back the next day, my friend asked why the passenger seat was soaked. I explained the leak, the cracked seal, the water inside the car. I didn't mention the road, or the woman, or the feeling that followed me for miles. Everything that happened had a reason. I can trace each part back to something real and physical. That doesn't change how it felt in the moment, driving alone at night, trusting a failing map, surrounded by damp air and flickering light, watching water crawl down glass in the shape my fear chose for it. I work road maintenance, mostly night work, the kind that happens when everyone else is asleep and the roads are empty enough to shut down lanes without causing chaos. That night, I was coming off a double shift, 14 hours with only short breaks, my body running on coffee and habit. I was tired enough that I slapped my face at red lights, just to keep my eyes from drifting shut. My hands felt thick on the steering wheel, like they belonged to someone else. The drive home followed the same back road I had used for years. I knew every dip, every patched crack, every place water pooled after rain. It cut through a stretch of mixed woods and open field. No streetlights, just reflectors nailed to posts and the thin white line sliding onto the headlights. I liked that road because it was quiet and predictable. That night, quiet felt heavy instead of calm. My headlights picked up a shape ahead that didn't fit. At first it was just a flash of reflective material, bright and sudden, floating in the dark. My foot came off the gas without me thinking about it. As the car rolled closer, the shape resolved into a man standing in the middle of my lane. He wore a reflective vest, the kind we all wear, neon yellow with silver strips. His arms hung loose at his sides. His posture was slack, not alert like someone flagging traffic. There was no truck pulled over, No cones, no warning signs. The road behind him was empty in both directions. I slowed more and flashed my lights. The beam washed over him, lighting his face and chest, then dipped back down. He didn't react. He didn't flinch or step aside. He didn't lift a hand. He just stood there, planted, like he was waiting for something else entirely. As I rolled closer, details came into focus that made my stomach tighten. The vest was torn along one side, the fabric frayed and dirty, reflective strips peeling and curling like old tape. It looked like it had been dragged along asphalt. His pants were stiff with grime. His boots caught the light next, and that's when I noticed they were on the wrong feet. The toes flared out at odd angles, creased the wrong way, like he had forced them on without caring how they fit. I leaned on the brake and edged the wheel to the left, my heart thudding hard enough to feel in my throat. I didn't want to stop. I didn't want to roll my window down. Every instinct told me to keep moving. I swerved around him with a wide arc, gravel crunching under my tires as I crossed the edge of the lane. For a split second, as I passed, my headlights lit his face from the side. His eyes looked unfocused, not fixed on me or the car, just forward into nothing. I checked my mirror as soon as I was past him. He was still facing the same direction, body unmoved, but his head had turned. His chin followed the car as it went by. Neck twisted farther than felt normal, eyes locked on the taillights long after I had passed. He didn't step toward the road. He didn't wave. He just watched. I kept driving. I didn't slow down again. The road ahead blurred as adrenaline cut through the fatigue. I watched the mirror until the reflectors swallowed him and the dark closed in. The rest of the drive home passed in a strange haze. I replayed the image over and over, the wrong boots, the torn vest, the way his head turned without his body moving. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my hands were shaking again, not from exhaustion this time. I slept hard and dreamless. When I woke up late the next morning, the image still felt sharp, like it had happened minutes ago. I told myself there had to be a simple explanation. A stranded worker, someone confused, someone hurt. I couldn't let it sit unanswered. I went into the yard and checked with dispatch later that day. I asked about night crews assigned to that stretch of road. I asked about emergency call-outs, breakdowns, accidents, anything that would put a person standing alone in the lane after midnight. There were none. No scheduled work. No unscheduled work. No reports. The logs were clean. That unsettled me more than if there had been an accident. At least then, there would have been a reason. That evening, on my way to another shift, I drove that same back road again, slower this time, eyes scanning the shoulder and the center line. The road looked normal. Too normal. No sign of a person. No debris. No drop gear. Then my headlights caught the pavement where he had been standing. The asphalt was freshly scuffed in an oval patch, dull compared to the surrounding surface. It looked like someone had stood in one spot for a long time, shifting weight back and forth, grinding dirt and grit into the road. The marks were too concentrated to be tire tracks and too shallow to be damage from a fall. They sat right in the center of the lane, exactly where he had been. I pulled over and got out, crouching to look closer. The scuffs overlapped in a way I recognized. We see it near work zones sometimes, where a flagger stands for hours, boots slowly polishing the surface. The shape matched a person's stance. The size matched boots. Boots worn on the wrong feet would scrape that way, dragging edges that shouldn't drag. I stood there in the quiet, the explanation settling in piece by piece. A former worker, or someone who had taken a vest from a site or a truck. Someone exhausted, disoriented, maybe injured, wandering a road he shouldn't have been on. Boots swapped in the dark, or put on wrong because his hands were shaking or his head wasn't right. Standing in a lane because he thought he was still on duty, still doing his job, even though the job was gone. The way he didn't react to the lights made sense then. The way his head tracked the car, without his body moving, felt less like something unnatural and more like tunnel vision. A person locked into one task, one point of focus, unable to break out of it. Someone had come along later. A trooper, a driver who stopped, maybe even one of us on a patrol. Someone had guided him off the road and away before daylight, before anything worse happened. That part wouldn't show up in the logs if it didn't turn into an incident. I got back in my truck and drove on, the road familiar again, but changed. I knew how thin the line was between doing this job and becoming another hazard on the asphalt. I had felt that edge myself after long nights, that pull to keep going even when the body begged to stop. I still drive that road. I still work nights, but I don't slap my face at lights anymore. If I feel that hollowed out tiredness creeping in, I pull over where it's safe and rest. I think about that scuffed patch of road and how easily someone can blend into the dark, not as a threat, not as something unreal, just as a person who stayed upright too long when they should have laid down. That's what stays with me. Not fear of what I saw, but how close it felt to something that could have been me. I was driving home from my uncle's funeral, alone, late enough that the sky had already lost its color. We weren't close, not in any way that showed on the surface, but the day still hollowed me out. It wasn't grief like crying or memories. It was more like something had been scooped from my chest and left a draft behind. Silence made it worse, so I kept the radio off and let the road fill the space. Route 50 stretched out flat and straight, a dark ribbon through open land. There were no other cars, no headlights coming at me, no taillights ahead. Even the sky felt empty. I didn't see planes. I didn't hear insects, just the steady sound of tires on asphalt and the wind sliding along the body of the car. The heater pushed dry air at my hands. My suit jacket was folded on the back seat. The smell of old flowers clung to the fabric. Every so often I swallowed hard, not because I was about to cry, but because my throat felt tight for no clear reason. I focused on keeping the car centered, watching the white line drift past like a slow metronome. About an hour in, I noticed the billboard. It stood off the right side of the road, burned out and skeletal, its vinyl skin torn and curled. The image was long gone, replaced by a gray smear and a jagged rip that hung down like a loose flap. One pole leaned slightly, bent near the base, the metal dark with rust. I registered it without thinking much about it, just another dead thing along a lonely highway. 10 minutes later, I saw it again. Same tear, same angle, same bent pole. The headlights caught the same shine on the ripped edge. I frowned and glanced at the speedometer. I was moving at a steady pace. The road was straight. I hadn't turned off anywhere. I told myself it was a different billboard that looked the same, or that my tired brain was stitching details together. Then I passed a third time. My stomach dropped in a slow, heavy way. I leaned forward, gripping the wheel tighter. I watched for landmarks. The land on either side of the road looked the same, low scrub and open dirt, but the billboard was exact. Even the way the vinyl fluttered slightly in the wind was the same. I checked the odometer. The numbers were moving forward, steady and normal. I wasn't slowing down. I wasn't circling. The gas gauge had dipped since the last time I noticed it. Everything about the car said I was going somewhere new. The fourth time I saw it, my hand started to shake. I slowed and pulled onto the shoulder a short distance past it. Gravel popped under the tires. The engine idled with a low, even hum. I shut the car off and stepped out into the cold. The air hit me hard, sharp and clean. It smelled like dust and old grass. My breath came out in white clouds. The silence was wide and heavy, pressing in from all sides. Route 50 lay empty in both directions, the pavement pale under the moon. I walked a few steps away from the car, toward the shoulder, trying to ground myself in the feel of the gravel under my shoes. That was when I heard footsteps behind me. They were slow and deliberate, crunching lightly, matching the rhythm of my own steps. My back stiffened. Every muscle in my body locked at once. I stopped walking. The sound stopped too. I turned around. There was nothing there. No person, no animal, just the car, dark and still, and the stretch of road fading into black. My heartbeat thudded loud enough to drown out everything else. I looked down. My footprints marked the gravel clearly, leading away from the driver's door in a shallow arc. They went farther than I remembered walking, curving off toward the ditch before stopping. There were no other prints, just mine. The crunching sound had been my own steps echoing back at me in the open air, delayed and distorted by the cold and the empty space. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at those marks, trying to line up memory with evidence. I cannot remember walking that far. I could not remember turning. The gap in my recall felt worse than the sound had. I got back in the car and shut the door hard. The interior felt too small after the open night. I started the engine and pulled back onto the road without looking at the billboard again. I drove for another long stretch, eyes fixed forward, jaw tight. Eventually, the burned-out sign appeared in my mirrors, shrinking into the dark. It did not come back after that. The road began to change in small ways I hadn't noticed before. A gentle bend here, a shallow rise there. I passed a side road marked only by a small reflective post. Later, I saw another, then another. The land dipped and lifted, subtle enough that I could have missed it earlier in the dark. Near dawn, the sky lightened from black to deep blue. Shapes sharpened. The land took on detail. I recognized a cluster of low buildings in the distance and a grain silo off to the left. When I finally stopped for gas, my legs felt weak when I stepped out. Inside the station, under bright lights, I checked my phone and the map. Route 50 in that area split briefly into a frontage loop to bypass a long-term construction zone. At night, with no traffic and poor signage, the loop fed back into the same stretch of road after several miles, passing the same billboard on the outer curve. The odometer kept moving because I had been moving, just not forward in the way I assumed. Later, when I looked closer at the location where I pulled over, I understood the footprints too. The shoulders sloped gently, and the gravel was packed unevenly. Sound carried oddly there, bouncing off the embankment and back toward me. In my exhausted state, hollowed out and running on habit, my senses had lagged just enough to turn my own movement into something foreign. Grief does that. It steals small pieces of time. It dulls edges. It makes familiar things feel wrong without changing them at all. I drove until the sun came up fully, until the road filled with other cars and the world felt shared again. I never stopped after that. Not for rest, not for coffee, not even when my eyes burned. I made it home late in the morning, parked in my driveway, and sat there with the engine off, listening to it tick as it cooled. The night stayed with me longer than it should have. I don't drive long distances at night anymore. Not because I think something is waiting on the road, but because I know what my mind can do when it's empty and tired and the world is quiet enough to let it wander. We were coming back from a lake party late at night, tired and half sober, trying to beat a storm that had been building since sunset. The air still smelled like sunscreen and wet towels inside the car. My clothes stuck to my skin. I sat in the passenger seat with my forehead against the glass, watching trees blur past while lightning flickered far off, silent but sharp enough to light up the clouds. No one remembers who suggested the shortcut. It might have been the map app rerouting us. It might have been someone pointing at a sign we barely saw. All I know is that the road stopped feeling familiar in a way that didn't happen all at once. The pavement narrowed until the lines vanished. The shoulders fell away. Then the asphalt ended and the tires started crunching over gravel. The trees leaned in close, tall and thin, packed so tight their branches blocked most of the sky. The storm dimmed what little light the moon gave. Our headlights felt weaker, swallowed by the dark ahead. The beams cut into leaves and trunks, but didn't seem to reach the road far enough. The car slowed without anyone saying why. Every few minutes we passed abandoned driveways. They were narrow dirt cuts disappearing into the trees. Old mailboxes still stood at the edges, some crooked, some painted long ago, names peeled off or worn blank. There were no houses behind them, no lights, just empty gaps where the forest had reclaimed the space. I tried to picture homes there, porches, parked cars, sounds of people, but it felt wrong, like forcing an image onto a place that didn't want it. The storm crept closer. Thunder rolled low and wide. Rain started as a fine mist that made the gravel shine. The windshield wipers squeaked at the slowest setting. Lightning flashed again, closer this time, and in that brief white light, I saw a shape behind us. It was a truck. Not close, not far. Just there, filling the lane behind our car. I hadn't seen headlights before, but now I saw the outline of the hood, the cab, the bed. The flash was gone, and the darkness swallowed it. I leaned forward and looked in the side mirror. Nothing but rain and the narrow track of road. A minute later, another flash hit, brighter. The truck was still there. No headlights, no marker lights, just a dark mass where a vehicle should not be driving without lights, especially on a road like this. My stomach tightened. I kept watching the mirror, waiting to see lights bloom on, but they didn't. The road curved and dipped. The truck stayed with us. When the car sped up slightly, the distance stayed the same. When it slowed, so did the truck. Gravel sprayed under our tires. The engine strained a little on the inclines. The storm grew louder, rain tapping harder, thunder cracking sharp and close. We passed more driveways, more mailboxes. Some had flags still attached, rusted in place. Some leaned so far they were almost touching the ground. There were stretches where the trees pressed in so close that the road felt like a tunnel. In those places, the lightning didn't reach us at all, and the truck disappeared into the black, only to snap back into view with the next flash. I tried to tell myself the driver behind us had lights off to avoid bugs or glare. I tried to tell myself it was someone local who knew the road. The explanations fell apart as soon as I formed them. No one drove like that in a storm on a gravel road at night. No one followed that closely without passing when there was space. My mouth felt dry. The car smelled like damp clothes and hot plastic. My foot bounced without me meaning to move it. Every sense narrowed to the mirror and the sound of gravel. 20 minutes passed like that. The road twisted, then straightened, then twisted again. The storm sat overhead now. Rain poured hard enough to blur the edges of the world. The lightning came faster, sometimes twice in a few seconds, lighting the trees like broken bones. Then, in the middle of a straight stretch, the truck vanished. There was no turnoff, no driveway, no curb to hide it. One flash showed behind us. The next showed nothing. The road behind was empty, rain streaking across the light, trees standing still. It was like someone had erased the shape between one heartbeat and the next. I stared at the mirror until my eyes burned. I leaned forward and twisted to look through the back window. Nothing, just a narrow track and the dark woods closing in. The sense of being watched didn't fade right away. It lingered, heavy and close, even as the distance behind us stayed empty. We kept driving. No one suggested stopping. The road slowly widened. The gravel thinned and turned back into pavement. The trees pulled away enough to show strips of sky. The storm began to move past us, thunder trailing off into low rumbles. Eventually, distant headlights appeared ahead, then a lit intersection, then a gas station glowing like a promise. We pulled into the lot and sat there with the engine running, rain steaming off the hood. My hands were shaking when I wiped them on my shorts. The night felt normal again in a way that made the last stretch seem unreal. Later, when we were home and dry, we checked the map. The road we took was marked as a local access route that dead-ended near the lake. It didn't connect to the highway we came out on. There was no through road shown, no junction that matched what we had driven. According to the map, we should have had to turn around. We dug deeper. Old county maps showed something different. Years ago, before the lake was expanded and before several properties were bought out, the road had continued through. It had been cut off when the land flooded, and the remaining section was left as a service route. The connection still existed on the ground, but it wasn't maintained or marked. It was used by utility crews and logging trucks moving between parcels during storms when other routes flooded. The abandoned driveways made sense then. Houses removed, land reclaimed, mailboxes left behind because no one bothered to pull them. The narrow lane, the gravel, the lack of signs, all of it fit. The truck fit too. A heavy vehicle moving equipment between sites. Lights off to avoid blinding oncoming drivers on a tight road. Using lightning to see far ahead. Following us because there was nowhere safe to pass until the pavement returned. When the road widened and joined the maintained route, the truck turned off onto a service spur hidden by trees and rain. Gone between flashes because it had already slowed and peeled away. We came out 15 miles from where the map said the road ended because the map was wrong, outdated, smoothed over for public use. We had driven a piece of infrastructure that wasn't meant for late-night traffic, especially not during storm, knowing that didn't erase the feeling of it. The memory still carries weight. When I think about that night, I remember the shape of the truck appearing and disappearing, The way the road felt too narrow for mistakes, the mailboxes standing guard over empty land. It was all real. That made it worse.